Welcome to episode number 4, The New Beginning. Following the death of Abel, Eve gave birth to another son, named Seth. Seth was a godly man. He believed God's promise to send the special child. Through Seth and his righteous descendants, God established the seed of the woman. As centuries went by, however, fewer and fewer descendants of Seth called on the name of the Lord. Fewer believed in the promised child. By the time we come to Genesis chapter 6, the whole earth was filled with wickedness and violence. Let's look at what God has to say about the earth at that time. Genesis 6:5. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But there was one righteous man who believed God's word and looked for the promised son. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. So God looked on the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. Now listen to what else God says to Noah. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. Did you notice a key word in this verse? The first mention of the word covenant appears here in Genesis 6:18. But I will establish my covenant with you. The word covenant appears 292 times in the Bible and is a key theme in it. What is a covenant? Well, it's a promise to do something. It's a contract between 2 parties, or an agreement. It is a legal and binding statement of trust in a person's word of promise. In Bible times, what took place in making a covenant? What did they do when they made a covenant? Let us look at the various aspects of making a covenant so we can understand the significance of God establishing his covenant with Noah and with man in general. Here are the elements of a covenant. A covenant was made between a stronger and a weaker party. This might be a king and his subjects, master and slave, a boss and employer, husband and wife, creator, creation. The stronger party was to protect the weaker. The weaker was to serve the stronger and to fight for him when necessary. It involved the cutting of flesh and the shedding of blood. It involved a sacrifice. Both parties made pledges and oaths. It usually involved a ritual or ceremony. The covenant demanded trust, obedience, and loyalty. It involved obligations, blessings, and curses, and maledictory oaths. It involved a sign or witness. Often people set up standing stones as a witness. It was concluded with a fellowship meal. And finally, the covenant was permanent. It involved the person's total being. Death was the penalty for breaking the covenant. Now let's go back to Genesis 6:18 and 19. What was the covenant that God made with Noah? He promised to keep them alive in the ark during the judgment on the earth. As I mentioned before, in literature, authors often use a literary device called foreshadowing. It means to suggest something in advance. What does the ark foreshadow? The ark which saved Noah in the judgment of the flood is a foreshadowing of Christ, who is the ark for believers in the final judgment of the world. The wickedness of the world was so great that Noah was the last righteous man. If Noah had died, there would be no believers in God's promise through whom the promised child could be born. God preserved Noah and his family in the ark. Following the judgment on wicked humanity, Noah offered a sacrifice of thanksgiving to the Lord. Many think that God is cruel because he destroyed the whole world but Noah. Actually, the judgment, the flood, was a severe mercy. The seed of the serpent had almost succeeded in destroying the seed of the woman. It was because of God's great love that he preserved the human race. from the seed of the serpent through Noah and the flood, and continued to fulfill his purpose for man and achieve his goal in history, his glory. What is the first command that God gave to Noah and his family after the flood? So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." God gave Noah and his sons the same command that he gave to Adam and Eve. God began again with Noah to fill the earth with people who will worship and glorify him, people who will submit to his rule and be his regent on earth. In Genesis 11, we see that Noah's descendants began to migrate from mountains of Ararat, where the ark had settled after the flood, to the plains below, but they quickly forgot God's instructions and his promise. Genesis 11:1 says, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth.'" The people were to make God's name great, not their own name. They were to fill the earth with God's glory, not their own. So what does God do? Well, in Genesis 11:5 it says, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they have proposed to do will be withheld from them." Their monolingual language united them in their rebellion against God and in their refusal to fill the earth for God's glory. God confused their language and scattered them throughout the earth, thus creating the nations. Genesis 11:7 says, "Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth." Thus the nations were created. When God scattered the people, they took their rebellious hearts and propensity to create false religion with them. What was to happen to the promised seed of the woman? In Genesis 12, God reveals a new aspect of his plan to reclaim the earth, redeem man and restore his glory, through one man and his descendants, Abram. Up until chapter 12, God was working with humanity as a whole, but now he employs a new tactic. Let's look at Genesis 12, 1 through 3. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." God's new tactic is to use Abram, later renamed Abraham, as part of his plan to restore his kingdom and redeem mankind. God makes a covenant with Abram. He says, "I will make you into a great nation." And by the way, this is the first time God uses the word nation. "And I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Now, notice that there are three important clues to God's plan in this covenant. God says, "I will bless you." That's my obligation. Now, what's Abraham's obligation? You will be a blessing. In Hebrew, this is a strong command. You be a blessing. That is your obligation. And I will make sure you are a blessing. The result will be that all people will be blessed through you. This circle is a picture of the earth. The different colors represent the nations. Since the people had been scattered throughout the earth and formed into different linguistic groups, they could no longer understand each other. That meant that though they were all rebellious against God, they could no longer be united in their rebellion. Therefore, in their desire to make their own names great, they began to fight against each other. God's plan was to choose one man, Abram. He would bless him and make him into a great nation. And through that man's descendants, he would reach all the other nations with the knowledge of the true God. However, there was a problem. Abram and his wife were old and had no children. But Abraham believed that God would give him an heir and make him a great nation. But a nation needs much land. Abram wonders where they are going to live. Therefore, God not only promised Abram an heir, but he promised him land.